Luke chapter 15, let's begin reading verse 11. Luke chapter 15, verse 11. I want to talk to you this morning about hogwash. That's exactly what we're going to talk about. Look at it, verse 11, if you will, Luke chapter 15. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine, to feed the hogs. And he would fain, or would gladly have filled his belly with the husk, or the hogwash, that the swine, that the pigs, the hogs, did eat. And no man gave unto him. Kind of hungry, wasn't he? Verse 17, and when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and he came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said, his planned speech, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Before he could finish out the thing and say, Look, I'll be glad to be a butler. I'll be anything you want me to be, a hired servant. Before he could say anything else, but the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry, for this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now, the story this morning is very simple, and the lesson very easy to understand. Here we have the story of a man, his 2 boys, and one boy in particular, we find out that he's kind of dissatisfied with things. He don't like things the way they are. He don't like to be told what to do. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I mean, I have to get up and every day and work all day long, and it's just a thankless job. It's the same old thing in and out, and not having any fun. I'm just sick of the whole thing. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I don't like saying yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir. I don't like being respectful. I want to do my own thing. I want to get out on my own and make my own way. Who needs everybody else? I want to live. I don't want to sit here and just waste my life. So he went to his daddy, and he told him, he said, Daddy, he said, I'm sick and tired of the whole thing. He said, and I'm tired of working. He said, I'm tired of all of it. He said, I want to have some fun. He said, I'm leaving. I want you to give me what I've earned over the years. He said, now my brother and I, we're supposed to share things one day. He said, and I'd like mine right now, and whatever increases, well, then he can just have it all. But up till now, I want what I've earned. And I'm sure it broke his daddy's heart. And no amount of talking would seem to help, because the kid he was dead sure he knew more than Daddy did. And the fact of the matter is that many young people think that they know more than Mom and Daddy does. But the truth of the matter is, Mom and Daddy know more than young people do, always. You say, well, I'm getting a raw deal. Man, I have it rough. You don't understand what all I have to do. Yeah, I know, it's pitiful, isn't it? Bless your little heart. Have a rough time. My parents make me make my bed. Yeah, that's murder, isn't it? Isn't it terrible? Have to crawl out and make your bed. Yeah. Have to pick up your clothes. You can't leave things thrown around, and you got to put your toys and your sports equipment or your dolls or whatever you might have in your house, You say, well, I'm a teenager. I don't play with dolls. Hogwash. You play with dolls. They're called stuffed animals now. And, man alive, I've seen girls' rooms got so many stuffed animals. And one girl's room I've seen is my own daughter's. Deborah's 12 years of age. She's got 32 stuffed animals. And that's unbelievable. I don't know where in the world she puts the silly things. And, well, I do too. They're all over the bed. They're all over the floor. They're all over the chairs. They're everywhere. And you say, well, I just don't like anybody telling me what to do. And I'm a slave around my house. Yeah, I know. Isn't it pitiful? Yeah, bless your heart. You have to help sweep the floors and help do the dishes, And you're just mistreated. That's all there is to it. And anybody who thinks that they have to show some respect and they have to do a little work around the house, that they're just being mistreated. Young people, you hear me. God help you. If you have parents who care whether or not you learn respect, and you have parents who care whether or not you learn how to work, then you better thank God you do. Because the fact of the matter is that some people aren't worth a powder and lead to take to blow them up simply because they never did learn respect. They never have learned how to work. When I was in Tennessee Temple Schools in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I'll never forget my first year there. And in 1959, man, I thought it was something else. Tennessee Temple, fantastic, still is. Tremendous place to go for Christian education. And my first year of college, literally, I was in the Bible school. And I remember I got there. I was back home. I was one of those nuts, that carried the Bible to school. And that was in the public school, by the way. And my high school that I attended had 2,500 students. It had the gangs and everything else. And that was back in the day of the black leather jacket gang, and with the switchblades and all that stuff. But I carried my Bible to school, and I witnessed, and everybody thought I was a nut. They called me Holy Joe and preacher kid and fanatic and nut and everything you can think of. It's no big deal. It didn't bother me an awful lot. But I was looking forward to getting out of high school and going to a Christian college. And that's what I did. Went to Tennessee Temple Schools in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And when I got to Tennessee Temple Schools, hey, I'll never forget it. The first thing I saw when I walked onto the campus of Tennessee Temple Schools, I saw somebody who was working for the school. I didn't know what they called it then, but they called it scholarship program, work scholarship. And I saw a kid, a boy, with a big broom, one of those kind that, is long at the bottom, where you push it. And he had one of those big brooms, and he was sweeping the gutters. He was sweeping in the streets. Now, man alive, you've seen people sweeping the streets, and every time you see somebody sweeping the streets, you think, man alive, isn't that terrible? That's a horrible job. That's pitiful. That's a rotten job. I mean, that guy must be an ignoramus and everything else under the sun, and hadn't got any education, no ability, and not an awful lot of sense, and that's the only thing he can do, and he's got to take one of the worst jobs in the world. Look at him, sweeping the gutters. And I saw this kid sweeping the gutter, and I thought to myself, well, look at that. And then I heard the kid, as he was pushing the broom and sweeping the gutter, he was singing, "Oh, how I love Jesus." And I thought, now there's a nut if I ever saw one, boy, And I thought, man, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because that's the kind of nuts that I've been all of my Christian life. And I found that I had come to a whole school full of nuts, a place where people loved God and who believed the Bible and had Bible standards, everything that I had believed and stood for. And many times in our youth group, I was the only one that did. But now I was at Tennessee Temple Schools. But I remember my first year at Tennessee Temple Schools, man, I worked. My parents couldn't pay my school bill. I had to work to pay my way through. And I worked hard at it, too. Hey, there's nothing wrong with work. You better learn to do it now, because if you don't, brother, you'll end up destroying yourself. You'll make a mess of your life if you don't learn how to work. But the first few weeks of school, I started in the middle of summer school of 1959. Started in July, and would go through August. And I remember, as I went to school and worked there, I got a job that did not pay me enough to pay my school bill and to pay for the whole thing. Now, back then, I don't know what they do now. I don't think they'd allow this now, but back then, during the summer, they would allow you just to pay your school bill and rent for your room where you stayed. And if you didn't want to eat in the dining hall, you could just say, I don't want to, and they wouldn't charge you for it. You didn't have to pay for that part. Well, I knew I had to have so much money in order to pay my school bill and to pay for that room. And it figured out that I had just enough, what I made, I had just enough to take my tithe out and give it to the Lord, and then to pay for my room and to pay for the school bill, but not for any food. And I had it figured out down to the letter. Man, I knew that I was going to be able, for several weeks, I was going to be able to go to school and pay for the room where I slept, but I wasn't going to eat for about 6 weeks. And that was exactly what it came to. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Now, how in the world am I going to do that? And so I started out, and I did. I didn't eat in the school, in the dining room, and I had no way to get to work except to walk. And I walked about 3.5 miles one way just to go to work. And I remember, I didn't know anybody. Nobody knew me. I was fresh there in school, but I got a job. And so I walked. And one day, while I was walking, I found some money on the ground. I found $1. Now that was big stuff. I hadn't been eating. And so I figured, well, instead of taking that $1 and just going and blowing it on a whole lot of things, I have to walk right past a place that sells hamburgers for 25 cents. So I bought one 25-cent hamburger and didn't buy anything to drink with it, didn't buy French fries. I mean, boy, I was having a rough time. I was in poverty, and that was murder, you know. And but I bought one hamburger, and that lasted me all day. The next day, I walked to work again. I didn't eat till I walked to work. I'd buy one hamburger, and I'd eat. And I saved a quarter every day, and I did that. And you know what? On the 5th day, just before I left, some guy came up and he said, hey, he said, understand you're going to play basketball? I said, yeah. He said, well, let's go talk about it. I said, well, I don't know. And I said, I've only got about an hour before I have to go to work, and before I had to start walking. And he said, that's all right. He said, come on, we got plenty of time. He said, let's go talk about the basketball team and some things. He said, I'm thinking about playing too, and I'd like you to talk with me. And I said, well, I don't know. He says, come on, I'll buy you a hamburger. I said, let's go. And that's the way I did it. The next week, a guy in the room across the hall from me, he was working in a church. He came back Sunday night, and he came back carrying a sack full of tomatoes and a sack full of apples that the people in the church had given him. He was the song leader in that church. And I guess that was his offering. I don't know what it was. But he came in a big sack load of tomatoes and big sack full of apples. And he came over. He said, hey, Darrell. He said, you like tomatoes? I said, I sure do. He said, here, have one. He said, you like apples? I said, yeah. He said, here, have one. And he said, anytime you want an apple or a tomato, just go in the room and get one. Do you know what? For about the next, and that happened, that went on for 4 weeks. Every day, I'd go get me an apple and a tomato. That guy didn't know it, but every weekend when he brought new apples and tomatoes, he was feeding me the whole week, you know, and that's what I was eating on. Look, young people, the point I'm trying to make is, hear me, God help you, this old idea, I don't want to work. Well, I'm having a rough time, and I don't think it's fair that I have to work, and I don't think it's fair that I've got to put up with certain things, so I want to have some fun. I want to get out and make my own way. Hey, you can't live without working. You can't live without any character training. You'll make a mess of your life. This young man said, Daddy, I've had it up to here. You're not going to tell me what to do anymore. I'm smarter than you are. I'll make it my own way. Give me what I got coming. Well, his daddy divided him the goods, but he got more than what he thought he was going to get. And he literally did get what was coming. But he didn't know what was coming. The Bible says that he, verse 13, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey. And notice whose journey it was. It was his journey. It wasn't God's journey. God didn't lead him. Hey, God will never lead anybody into sin. God will never lead anybody to disobey mom and daddy. And yet there are young people, some of you say, well, I'm just not going to do what mom and daddy says. It's called sin. It's called sin. God help you. You better learn to obey, not on mom and daddy, but you better learn to obey your teachers. You better learn to obey your leaders. You better learn to obey anybody that's an authority over you. You better learn to obey the laws of the land. You better just learn to obey rules. You say, I don't like rules. Doesn't matter whether you like rules or not. Rules are there. And my Bible says even the laws of the land are ordained of God, or God says that laws are necessary and that the laws are right, and you better learn to obey them, because if you don't obey them, you'll pay for it. You'll pay for it. And this young man, he went his own way. And where'd he go? Into a far country. Yeah, he left home. He left the good things. He left daddy behind. And how many Christians get out of fellowship with God and run away from God and think that they're going to have a better time and they're going to have some fun, and who needs God and who needs to live right and who needs to do what's right. And so there he goes. And then notice the next phrase, and there he wasted his substance with riotous living. How did he live? He lived in one big party after another. Riotous living. Living in sin and doing everything you can think of. He got down there, and the staggering thing is that I'm sure that whenever he went down and started partying, had all that money, that everybody flocked around him and began to sing, oh, he's a jolly good fellow, and everybody said, hey, this is the kind of guy that we like, he's one of our kind, and let's go in and let's have a party with him, and as long as he's got the money, we'll have the biggest time you ever saw. And they did. Man, they lived it up. He had a big time. And I'm sure that he drank, and he started smoking with the crowd, and they said, well, let's go out and try this. And he played with sex, and he went to the dirty movies and whatever they had. I mean, he did everything. He did everything. You say, he didn't have movies back then. Okay, he went to the dirty place. He went to the houses of sin. But I guarantee you, he played with sex. This young man, living it up, having a big time, becoming like the people that he was running with. I guarantee you, the young man probably started using filthy words. Got a dirty mouth because of the crowd he's running with. Because that's always been true. That's always been true. Hey, young people, listen to me. God help you. Don't have anything to do with anybody with a filthy mouth. You stay away from them. You say, well, this is a Christian school, and we don't have anybody around goes around cussing. My hind leg, you do too. And some of you know who they are. And I'll guarantee you, any young man or young lady, and I take that back because there's no real sharp young men and there's no young ladies that do things like that. But any guy and any girl that would have a dirty, filthy mouth, God help you, you got any sense, you'll stay as far away from them as you can. Don't you have anything to do with them. Matter of fact, that's Bible. You know that? My Bible tells me that whenever you find somebody who's disobedient to the Word of God, but yet they claim to be saved, God says, have no fellowship, no company with those who are in rebellion to God. My Bible says that you're not to be the pal and the buddy and the companion of unsaved people, because you'll end up doing the same things they're doing. And there are young people in this room this morning who have dirty, filthy, vulgar mouths. And you know it. Do you know what? My Bible tells me that the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes God's name in vain. My Bible says, let all the communication that comes out of your mouth, God says, let no filthy communication come forth from your mouth. God says, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. Or in other words, when you say yes and no, you just say yes or no. Don't say blank no or blank yes. God says you keep your mouth clean. But you see, the reason a person's got a dirty tongue is because they got a dirty heart. And somebody who can with a filthy mouth, run around cursing everything that moves and thinking it's smart and bragging about it and sneaking around doing it, I guarantee you, I would question whether or not that person's ever been born again. Because when a person gets born again, God not only cleans up a person's heart, but it also cleans up their tongue. Man, before I got saved, I thought it was smart to cuss just like everybody else does. Unsaved people think it's smart. They think it shows how tough they are, and how smart they are, and they're going to cuss up a storm. And before I got saved, I loved hearing it. We'd laugh about it. We'd think we was big shots because we did it. But after I got saved, anytime anybody cussed, brother, it just tore me up inside. Something inside would just snap, and it would just make me so miserable. I couldn't stand it. I hate it. And I hate it to this day. To this day, nobody cusses in my face. Nobody cusses in my face. Some may try it, but I'll stop them. You say, well, that's embarrassing. I'm not the one that did the cussing. Let them be embarrassed. Hear me. Young people, God help you. A dirty mouth proves there's a dirty heart. God says it's because of the things that proceed from the heart are the things that defile a man. My Bible says, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Or in other words, you're going to say what you are down inside. It'll come out. Don't cuss. Not even once or twice. You keep your mouth clean. Don't use any filthy words at all. And some of you may have parents who cuss constantly. I don't know. Maybe you have to listen to that stuff regularly. I don't know. If you do, I feel for you. I'm sorry for you. I wish we could do something about it. But the fact of the matter is, you'll end up destroying yourself if you got a dirty mouth. And then there's some people who say things like, well, I don't cuss. No, I know it. I was with a good Christian this week, man who loves the Lord. And he looked me square in the eye and said, oh, heck, who cares about all that stuff? That's all right. Nothing wrong with that kind of stuff. Now, we wasn't talking about cussing. We was talking about something else. But he used the word heck. You say, well, that's not cussing. You better get up a dictionary and read it then. Do you know that words like golly, gosh, heck, darn, and so many others, do you know that those are cuss words? The dictionary says it. You go look at the new International Collegiate Dictionary, Webster's, and you'll find the definition for every one of those words. The word gosh, the definition for that is a mild form of the word God. And every time anybody says, oh gosh, they are in essence saying, oh God. The word heck is a slang term for the word hell. And anytime anybody says it, that's what they're saying. The word darn is a mild form of the word damn. And you put gosh and darn together, and you've got God's name in vain. And I hear Christians, I hear adults run around sometimes, and something will happen and say, oh Lord. Do you know that's taking God's name in vain? And my Bible says that God will not hold a person guiltless who takes God's name in vain. Or before God, one day, you're going to answer for that. It's wicked sin. Young people, this guy, I know good and well that he did and became and lived and talked like the crowd around him because they thought he was a jolly good fellow. Man, he was a good Joe. But he wasted his substance with riotous living. Hey, you want to waste your life, then play with sin. That's exactly what will happen. Now that he's wasted his life, he's wasted his money, he's run out of money, now the problem begins. Verse 14. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. That's the way it always is. Hey, he spent all he had, a famine came, he began to be in want, and nobody come running to him and say, look, man, we've had a good time together. We've been good friends, and we've partied together, and we've drank together, and we've cussed together, and we've smoked together, and we've danced together, and we've played with the women together, and we've done all kinds of sin together. And I just want you to know that, brother, we're good friends, and I'm going to help you out now. No, they're not good friends. All they was interested in is what they could get out of him, and now if they got everything that he had, he can't find anybody to help him. He's lonely. Listen to me. People could care less about you. All they're interested in is what they can get out of you or what they can get you to do with them that's wrong. A person who wants you to play with sin is not your friend. And that's a fact. And all of his friends suddenly disappeared. Nobody wanted to help him. And so now in verse 15, he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, a stranger, a guy didn't even know. He went looking for a job. But the famine was so great he couldn't find anything except, watch this, the only thing he could find was a job feeding the pigs, feeding the hogs. Now, very apparently, this boy was a Jew. And the Jews were to have nothing to do with hogs. It was a sin against God for a Jew to have anything to do with pigs. And so now he's going to have to do something that for all of his life he's been told is absolutely wrong, is in rebellion to God. But it's not too big a deal with him because he's been doing that now for quite a while with his friends. He's smart. Well, things are a little rough right now, but they'll get better. And so his job is to feed the hogs. Did you ever see a pig pen? You ever been around one? Wonderful place, isn't it? Smells so good. But have you ever fed the hogs? You ever see them mix the food for the hogs? You know how they feed the hogs, don't you? They fry them some chicken, and fix some mashed potatoes and everything, and some gravy, and some tossed salad, and some corn, and some peas, and some hot rolls and butter and iced tea, and carry it down on a tray and say, here it is. No, as a matter of fact, they may fix food like that, but that's not for the hogs, that's for the people. And after the people have eaten everything they can eat on the table, and the scraps are left, then they take all them scraps and they scrape them in a big bucket, and there's the leftover mashed potatoes, slosh, and a little bit of the green beans and the peas, and you slip them in there, and then the leftover chicken, and you got all of that, and then here's the slosh with gravy, and slop all of that in there, and you stir it around real good and mix it up, and the leftover iced tea, you dump that in there, and the leftover coffee, you pour that in there, and the leftover milk, you dump that in there, and all the rest of the tossed salad, you just put that in there. It's scraps. Table scraps. The reason they call it slopping the hogs is because that's what it looks like. Slop. And they mix that stuff up there, and they pour some water in there, and they get it all good and sloppy, And they don't necessarily feed it right then and there, because see, they only slop the hogs once a day. And it may sit all day long, and the milk begins to curdle, and the mashed potatoes get mildew on them, and big lumps of mildewed mashed potatoes floating around in there, and the green beans get corroded, and here it comes, and oh, what a beautiful aroma. Going to feed the hogs. And the way you slap the hogs, you get one bucket in one hand and another bucket in the other hand, and you go walking down the path to the pig pen. And as you walk, you just can't keep them things right. And the things begin to rock a little bit in the bucket, and in a minute it slops over on your pants. And whoop, oh, yes, And after a while, you smell like the buckets, and you smell like the slop. And here he is. Kid that had everything, but thought he knew more than Mom and Daddy did. Now, he's wasted all of his money. Doesn't have any friends. He's having to slop the hogs. Buckets of hogwash. He carries them down to the old pig pen, and the old hogs are waiting. They're ready. And man, they're moving around there. They know it's dinner time. And the hogs are moving around. They're running up to the trough. They can see him coming, and they can smell it, and they know it's dinner time. Man, does it smell good to the hogs. And they carts that old stuff down there, and the hogs are all rooting, trying to get in next to the trough and everything, and he's picked up a bucket, and he's leaning, and he leans over and begins to pour that stuff into the trough, and it hits the trough and splatters all over the place, and all over him, and all over the hogs, and they're rooting and elbowing and getting in there and sticking their neck in there, and they're having the biggest time, trying to see who can get the best position on it. And he's sitting there and he's thinking, why, you dirty hogs, why don't you save some for me down there, That's what the Bible says. He was so hungry he wanted to eat what the hogs was eating. Hogwash. Hogwash. Hey, I tell you what, there's some things that all of us have had to eat that we wasn't necessarily fond of. Well, I'd like to put them in the old slop bucket, Put all the spinach and asparagus in there, Yeah, just get it all in there. And all the cottage cheese, the lumpy cream that's all soured and everything. You mix all that in there, and get rid of everything else. Oh, so many things I can remember I'd like to put in. Hey, to this day, I can't stand lasagna. I hate lasagna. Especially if it's got the cottage cheese and everything mixed in it and everything. Oh, the lasagna. Man, it's murder. You see all of that noodles and all of that greasy meat and the cottage cheese mixed in there together. I was up in, everybody listen, I was up in Pennsylvania. In a meeting one time, and a lady served us lasagna, and I couldn't believe it. I just looked at it. She said, well, go ahead and eat it. And I thought to myself, looks like somebody already did, Oh, lasagna looks horrible to me. It looks like stuff that I tried to eat once and couldn't, and it came back up, It was, it's murder. It's murder. And every time I think of the old hogwash that the hogs eat, I think of lasagna. There it is, the lasagna there too, and stir it up real good, And, and here he is. He's pouring in the slop in the trough, and the old hogs are eating it up good, and he's sick unto death because he's hungry and he wants to eat it too. And every day, day in and day out, it's like that, and he wants to eat it. Do you know what? Young people, the fact of the matter is that the things of sin in this world are just like that bucket of hogwash. The sinful things of this world, listen to me, Satan is the author of sin and all the filth that flows in our world today. Satan is the author of it. And I'll guarantee you the things of sin in this world are nothing more than the regurgitations of the devil. Now, if you're not too sure what that word regurgitations means, it means it's the throwing ups of the devil. If you're not too sure what that word means, it means it's Satan's puke. That's what it means, you know. I mean, that's what this old world is. The sinful things of this world, that's what they are. Every time somebody says, well, I don't care what anybody says, I'm going to be smart and I'm going to smoke. Give me a pack of hogwash, you know, man. You light up a cigarette and you're smoking all of that filth. God help you. I remember a man just a few days ago in North Carolina. He told me, preacher, he said, the one thing that really caused me to stop smoking was, he said, I bought a package of cigarettes out of a machine. He said, apparently they'd been in there for several days. I bought a package of cigarettes and I lit it up and I was smoking the thing, and he said, and I noticed something moving inside it. He said, what in the world's crawling in my cigarette? And he said, I opened it up and there was a tobacco worm. And he said, that did it right there. He said, think of that worm spitting all over my cigarette, you know, and crawling around in there, and I was going to burn him up and smoke him. He said, that did it. He said, anyway, it's the regurgitations of the world. Hey, that's what the filth of this old world is. Give me a big glass of hogwash. Yes, that's what I want, you know. I like the six-pack kind, you know. And or I want a cocktail of hogwash. Oh, look at there. There's the lasagna floating around in there, you know. And the spinach and all that stuff. Oh, the iced tea and the coffee and the milk all curdled mixed together. Guzzle, guzzle. That's what it is. The sin of this world is the filth and the regurgitations of Satan. My Bible says, in verse 17, he came to himself. In other words, he took a look at himself and he realized, what in the world am I doing? Man, I've been a fool. And he said, look at me. Here I am down here feeding the hogs and elbowing the hogs, and the filthy critters won't even give me anything to eat. He said, I'm sitting here in the hog pen smelling like a hog myself, and he said, my daddy has got hired servants that live better than I do. He said, I'm an idiot. He said, I thought I knew more than Daddy did. I thought I was smart. I thought I knew more than God did. And I thought that the best thing to do was just to play in sin and have a big time and don't care about anything. Live it up. Now, you see, the truth of the matter is, most people that live it up find they never can live it down. And he could not believe the mess he was in. Hey, young people, sin will always pull you down. It will always end up destroying you. It will not help you. It never will. And he came to himself and he said, brother, I've had it. I'm going home. He said, I'm getting out of here. I'm leaving all this behind. I'm going to go back and I'm going to live right. And I'm going to do what Daddy says. And if he'll let me, I'll just go back and be a hired servant because I don't deserve to be a son. But I'm going home. And I'm going to take what's coming. Can you see him pick himself up, slop his way across that pig pen with the stench and the mud and the filth all over him? Smelling like an old hog himself. Goes over to the fence, starts to climb up that fence. I can see him climb up that fence and straddle the top side of it, and just before he climbs on down the other side, he thinks to himself, you know, it really wasn't too bad. I mean, after all, the hogs, they're pretty nice guys, you know. And I think that I'm really going to miss that hogwash. I don't know what let me go back down in there, and I'll just Good old guy. Give me a big fistful of hogwash. I'm going to put it in my pocket here and take a big fistful of hogwash here and put it in my pocket there. And I'm going to put some hogwash in there and put some hogwash in there. Some back here. I'm going to take some of this stuff home because I just love hogwash. Hey, he didn't do that. Brother, when he wanted to leave the filth of the world, he was going to leave it all behind. He won't keep any of it. He knew what it was. And here he goes. He's got his speech all planned. And he arose and came to his father. He started home. I want you to notice something. The Bible says, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him. Do you know what? Here he was worried that his daddy wouldn't want him to come home, and he'd probably have to end up being a servant the rest of his life. But what he didn't know was his daddy loved him, just like God loves you. And his daddy was watching for him every day. Every day I can see his daddy go stand out at the road and look way down the road, hoping beyond hope that he might see his boy coming home. Days and weeks and months go by and he doesn't come. But Daddy doesn't quit looking. God never quits looking. God never quits hoping beyond hope that you'll come. God never quits calling. And this day the father went out on the road and he's looking down the road and crying out with his heart saying, "Oh, son, please come home. Don't get messed up. Don't stay there." He knew what had to happen. And this day the daddy saw him. And he ran, the Bible says, and fell on his son's neck, and he kissed him, and he hugged him. He was so glad to see him. And the boy, kind of holding back the tears, started his little speech and said, "Daddy," he said, "I've sinned against heaven, against God." And he said, "And I've sinned against you and in front of you." And he said, "And I'm no more worthy to be called your son," before he could get to make me a servant. Daddy turned around, the servants, they saw him running. They knew what it was. They all knew that the boy had come home. And everybody was rejoicing. And I can just see not only the daddy running down that road to meet the boy, but I can see all the servants. I can see all of them come running right behind the daddy because now daddy's glad. And he turns around after hugging his boy and he says to them, because they're coming down the road, says, "Somebody go back and get the best robe we got and bring it out here and put it on my boy. Bring a ring for his finger. Get him a pair of shoes." And he said, "And brother, kill a calf, dress it up and cook it. We're going to have a banquet. Because my boy's home. He's dead. And now he's alive." Young people, listen to me. If you're not saved, while you're playing in sin, you're as good as dead. If you're not saved, young people, you are destroying yourself. You'll send your soul to hell forever if you don't get saved. If you are saved, the hogwash of the world is the same for you as it is for anybody else. It won't send you to hell if you're saved, but it'll sure destroy you in this life. And if you've got any sense, God help you turn your back on the filth of this world and come on back home where you belong. You say, "Preacher, I've done a lot of wicked things. You sure God would want me to come home?" Yeah. God longs for you to come home. God sent messengers to you through preachers, through people who love you and love the Bible, love God, and they warn you, don't play with sin. God sent someone after you to beg and plead with you to come home, and that's the Holy Spirit. Come on home. If you're not saved, get saved. If you are saved, God help you turn your back on the filth of this world and come home and serve God like you ought to. Let me close with this illustration. I've heard it from several different preachers. Heard it years ago. And preachers have used it over and over again, but I think it's a beautiful illustration. There's a young man on a train several years ago. True story. And the young man is crying, sitting next to the window of the train, looking out the window, and he's crying. There's a preacher sitting in the seat across the aisle from him on the other side of the train. And he sees the boy crying, and he knows something's wrong, and after a while the preacher decides, well, I'll just speak to him, see if I can't help him. The preacher makes his way over to the young man, and he says, can I help you? He said, I see you're crying. He said, I know something's wrong. He said, I'm a preacher. He said, can I help you? And the young man looks at him, and with tears, he said, no. He said, I'll be all right. He said, no. He said, let me help you. Maybe we just talk about it. And the young man said, okay. The preacher sat down, and the young man told him the story, how that years before, as a young boy, teenage boy, he thought he knew more than Mom and Daddy did. He didn't like to be told what to do, didn't want to have to work around the house and help with the chores. He didn't want to have to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, yes, sir, and no, sir, and thank you, may I, please, you're welcome, the whole thing. He didn't like any of that. He wanted to have his fling. He wanted to have some fun out of life. And so he ran away from home. He broke his mother and daddy's heart, never told them where he was, stayed away for years. And now, years later, he didn't have anything, but he was sick of the world. He was sick of being lonely and friendless. He wanted somebody to love him. And he'd written a letter. He told the preacher, he said, I wrote a letter just before I left. He said, I didn't even wait for an answer. He said, I wrote it and then caught a train a few days ago to make my way home. He said, I was afraid that if I waited for the answer might be no, we don't want you to come home. He said, I wrote the letter and I told him I'm sorry and what a fool I'd been. And he said, I'm scared. I'm going home and I don't even know if they want me. He said, I asked them to do something. I told them I was starting. And I asked them to do something. If they wanted me to come home, if they still loved me and would forgive me, he said, I asked them to give me a sign of it. Because you see, the railroad tracks that we're on with this train right now run right behind my farm, my daddy's farm where I grew up. He said, there's a big oak tree right there by the tracks. He said, and I used to sit in the tree and sit under it sometimes, watch the train go by as a little boy and wave at the engineer. And dream about getting on that train one day and leaving. He said, and so I told him, if you really want me to come home and you really love me, it's all right. He said, then I asked him to put a white rag, tie a white cloth to one of the limbs of the tree. Because the train passes by our farm before it ever gets to the station in town a few miles away. And he said, if there's no white flag, I won't get off the train. I'll just keep going. And he said, and I'm scared. He said, preacher, I'm afraid there won't be a white flag there. He said, I don't know what to do. He said, I'm afraid to even look. I'm afraid it won't be there. He said, would you help me? The preacher said, you want me to look for you? He says, yeah, I can't look. He said, I'll tell you when we're getting near. And if you'll look to see if you can see a white flag in the tree, a rag tied to one of the branches, I'd appreciate it. They went on in silence for a while, and after a while the young man said, "We're getting near." Said, "The tracks will make a curve around here in a little while and come around a field, and there'll be a big tree on the right. You'll see it." He said, "And after we go around the curve," he said, "you look, I can't." And with fear in his face, the young man looked at the preacher and quit looking out the window, and the preacher looked past him, straight out the window. Never took his eyes off the fields. Didn't want to miss the tree. The train kept rolling, and around the curve it went. And the young man, he said, "Preacher," he said, you ought to be able to see it. We're getting close to it now. Do you see a big tree?" He said, "Yeah, I see a tree. We're coming up to it. It's a great big one right near the tracks." He said, "Yeah, that's the one." He said, Look careful. Look real hard, preacher." He said, "I'll look. I'll watch." He said, "Preacher, do you see a white flag? Is anything there?" And the young man began to cry, scared there wouldn't be anything there. And the preacher started to cry. And fear came over the young man's face, because he thought dead sure the tears in the preacher's eyes meant that there was no flag. The tree was empty. And the preacher cried, and he said, "Young man," he said, "I'm not going to tell you." He said, "Turn around and look yourself." He said, "I can't look." He said, "Is there anything there?" He said, "No, there's not one flag there." And the young man cried. He said, "Not one." He said, "No, sir." He said, "There's not one flag." He said, "There must be 1,000 of them." He said, "The tree has a white cloth tied to every limb on it. It looks like a white Christmas tree. Turn around and look." Young people, do you know what? If you're not saved in heaven, God waves the white flag of the blood of Jesus Christ that cleanses from every sin. And He says, "You want your sins to be like that? Then come on home. Come on home."